saying, "Are you kidding? You are so lucky. You have a well, you have a pump, you have arms."
Did a mountain men star vanish after a deadly crash without anyone noticing? Today, we're diving into the story of Nancy Oar, the fan-favorite Alaskan survivalist who seemed to disappear from TV and then from public life entirely. Most people just assume she stepped away quietly, like so many off-grid legends do. But what if that's not the truth at all? What if there's a much darker reason Nancy vanished? One involving a remote crash site, emergency calls that went nowhere, and a chilling timeline that doesn't add up. I've dug into the news reports, cast interviews, even old satellite crash data, and I found something no one's talking about. So in this video, I'm breaking down exactly what happened to Nancy Oar and why her story might be the most disturbing mystery in mountain men history. She vanished without a trace, and no one noticed. Nancy Oar didn't just fade from TV. She disappeared from the world. Fans were left wondering, where did she go? No big farewell, no final episode, no explanation. Just gone. But here's where it gets chilling. Nancy's exit wasn't just quiet, it was suspiciously silent. Before the cameras rolled, Nancy and her husband Tom were already legends in their own right. Tom, a fearless rodeo rider from the wild 60s, had traded bucking broncos for snowstorms in Montana's unforgiving Yak Valley. Nancy stood beside him, always calm, always resilient. She wasn't chasing fame, she was chasing peace. Together, they built a life most people couldn't even imagine surviving. No phone, no electricity, just two people, a cabin, and the brutal rhythms of the wild. But that's where the mystery deepens. When Mountain Men launched in 2012, producers weren't looking for actors. They wanted raw survivalists. And Nancy and Tom, they were the real deal. Viewers fell in love with their honesty, their grit, and their complete rejection of modern comfort. Nancy became a symbol of quiet strength, boiling pine needles for tea, crafting moccasins, and braving blizzards without complaint. Then one day, she was gone. No warning, no goodbye, just silence. And here's the twist: no official announcement, no memorial, no farewell from the network. Not even a statement from Tom. Fans started asking questions. But what they found raised more than just eyebrows. Because what if Nancy Oar didn't just retire from TV? What if something much darker happened, and it was hidden in plain sight? A love born in the rodeo and forged in isolation, before the wilderness, before the fame, before the whispers of her disappearance. Nancy Oar was just a young woman with a heart for art. And then she met Tom. Their love story didn't begin with a camera crew. It began somewhere dusty, loud, and wild, the rodeo circuit. Tom Oar was a bronc rider, a living legend of the American West, clinging to raging horses and chasing the adrenaline of untamed life. Somewhere along that dusty trail, he found something wilder than any bucking bronco: Nancy. They never cared about the spotlight. Fame was never the goal. Nancy was a creator, an artist at heart, while Tom was chasing something deeper than applause. Eventually, the roar of the rodeo faded, replaced by a different kind of wild, one that howled at night and froze your boots by morning. That's when they made the decision that changed everything. They packed up what little they had and vanished in the Montana wilderness. Not for a vacation, for life. Deep in the Yak Valley, where wolves prowled and winters felt endless, they built a life from scratch. No phone, no running water, no electricity, just firewood, grit, and love. While others feared the cold they called a home. But here's where it gets interesting. Nancy didn't just follow Tom, she helped lead. She hauled wood, trapped game, tanned hides, and transformed their cabin into a sanctuary. Their home wasn't a set. It was real, brutal, isolated. But for them, it was freedom. And that freedom became their identity. So when Nancy later vanished from the public eye, it wasn't just a missing person from a show. It was the disappearance of a woman whose entire life had been a living testament to survival, resilience, and love. But don't scroll yet, because what drove her off the map may have started with heartbreak and ended in something far more tragic. The mountain years that changed everything. By the time the cameras arrived in 2012, Nancy and Tom Oar had already lived through more danger, discomfort, and raw survival than most people could imagine. But mountain men didn't turn them into stars. It simply revealed their world, and the world couldn't look away. They weren't performers. They didn't fake hardship or exaggerate their lifestyle. What you saw was real. Hand-built cabins, animal traps, hand-sewn leather. Nancy was the quiet force holding it all together. She was strong without needing to shout, loyal without ever asking for credit, and fiercely committed to the life they'd chosen. But here's what most people missed. While Tom was out chasing wolves from their property or crafting buckskin shirts from tan hides, Nancy was just as busy keeping the whole operation running. She'd wake up before sunrise, boil water over a fire, repair gear, sew gloves, check traps, and prep meals, all in the dead of winter. For her, it wasn't just about surviving. It was about honoring the land. And yet, the cameras never quite captured the full depth of Nancy's strength. As the show gained popularity, letters poured in. Fans sent questions, thanks, and admiration. They saw in Tom and Nancy something rare, two people living by their own rules. Together, with purpose, with love. But the show couldn't last forever. And this is where the cracks began to show. The winters grew harsher. Tom's hands grew slower. Nancy's silence became more pronounced. Behind every charming episode was a real couple fighting real battles, aging in a world that offered no mercy. And then, after season of watching them endure the impossible, Nancy vanished from screen. No final episode, no farewell message, not even a hint of where she'd gone. What happened next will shock you. A fall from the roof, and a terrifying wake-up call. It started like any other winter day in Montana's Yak Valley. The snow was deep, the cold bit hard, and the roof needed clearing. Tom Oar had done it 100 times before, climbing up to shovel heavy snow so the cabin wouldn't cave under the weight. But this time was different. This time, everything went wrong. In one brutal second, Tom's boot lost grip on the icy rooftop. He slipped, fell, and hit the ground hard. Nancy heard the crash and ran. What she found would haunt her for years. Tom lay twisted, groaning in pain, unable to move. The isolation that once felt like peace suddenly became a prison. There was no ambulance around the corner, no hospital down the road. Just Nancy, alone in the wilderness, watching the strongest man she knew cry out in agony. But that's not all. Tom's fall didn't just break his body. It cracked the illusion of invincibility. For decades, they'd faced storms, predators, and poverty. But now, nature had sent a message loud and clear. Time was catching up. Nancy nursed Tom through his injuries with everything she had. She chopped wood, hauled water, cooked and cleaned while making sure her husband took every step toward recovery. But deep down, a new fear took root. What if it had been worse? What if Tom had hit his head? What if she hadn't heard the fall? What if next time she wasn't there? The land they had once loved now whispered a terrifying truth. They couldn't survive it forever. That fall from the roof marked a turning point. The Oars began having hushed conversations about aging, safety, and the life they'd built. For the first time in decades, the idea of leaving their mountain home didn't feel like betrayal. It felt like survival. But hold that thought, because what came next would tear their hearts apart. Saying goodbye to the mountains and to a piece of themselves. They didn't leave in a rush. There were no camera crews capturing a final farewell, no announcement to fans. Tom and Nancy Oar simply packed their lives into boxes and drove away. But what they were really leaving behind was everything they had ever known. The decision to leave the Yak Valley didn't come easy. It was like trying to let go of a limb. That land had been their lifeblood. 30 years of sunrises, blizzards, hard-won meals, and moments of perfect stillness. It was where Tom built their home with his bare hands, and where Nancy shaped a life out of nothing but grit and love. But here's where it gets heartbreaking. The mountains weren't just home. They were part of their identity. Each log in the cabin, each trail in the snow, each tree Tom had split or hide Nancy had tanned was a thread in the fabric of their lives. But Tom's joints were failing. Nancy's worry was growing, and they both knew the next emergency might be one they couldn't recover from. So they did the unthinkable. They chose Florida. It wasn't the wilderness. It wasn't quiet, but it was close to family. For the first time, they'd be near grandkids, Sunday dinners, and birthday parties instead of mountain lions and isolation. It was sunshine instead of snow, community instead of solitude. But it came at a cost. As they pulled away from the cabin, Nancy looked back at the place that had defined her marriage, her strength, her entire adult life. Tom sat silently, his weathered hands gripping the steering wheel. No words, just memories piled higher than the snowbanks they used to shovel. And that's just the beginning, because even in Florida, life didn't get easier. It got heavier. What came next would test Nancy in a way the mountains never could. A hidden health crisis and Nancy's greatest test. Florida was supposed to be a new chapter, a quieter life near family, a chance to rest. But almost as soon as they unpacked, disaster struck again, this time from within. Tom Oar was diagnosed with a heart condition. And suddenly, the man who had spent his life chasing wolves and surviving blizzards was fighting for his life from hospital bed. Nancy didn't panic. She couldn't afford to. Instead, she slipped into the role she'd always known: caretaker, protector, warrior. But this time, it wasn't about chopping wood or hauling water. It was about managing pills, monitoring machines, and keeping Tom alive. But listen to this. Tom needed a defibrillator vest. He had fluid building in his lungs. Every breath was a struggle. Every doctor visit came with new risks. They were miles from the wilderness now, but they were battling something just as fierce: aging, sickness, and a creeping sense that time was no longer on their side. And Nancy? She never flinched. She woke up early, tracked Tom's symptoms, made sure he ate right, and took his meds. When he couldn't walk far, she helped him. When he got scared, she stayed calm. When he felt like giving up, she gave him strength, all while hiding her own fear, because that's who Nancy is. But here's where it gets worse. This wasn't just a health scare. It was a full-blown reckoning. Tom's decline wasn't temporary. It was the beginning of a long, painful road, and Nancy was going to walk every step of it by his side, no matter how heavy it got. They had survived grizzly bears, minus 40-degree nights, and life-threatening falls. But this was a storm Nancy couldn't outhike. And yet, she never stopped trying. Hold that thought, because before they could catch their breath, the Oars would suffer a loss that shattered everything. The day everything fell apart. It was April 26th, 2015, a date that would carve a permanent scar into the hearts of Tom and Nancy Oar. Their life had already been shaken by age, injury, and the slow retreat from the mountains. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could prepare them for what came that day. Tom's daughter, Keely Oar, passed away. She was just 49 years old, a vibrant soul, known to many fans from her appearances on Mountain Men. Though Keely was Tom's daughter from a previous relationship, Nancy had loved her like her own. Keely's loss wasn't just a family tragedy. It was an emotional landslide that buried them both in silence and grief. But it gets even more heartbreaking. The cause of death was kept private, tucked away from headlines. The family wanted peace, not publicity. But the pain? That was real. Tom, the stoic mountain man who had faced wolves and raging rivers, was broken. And Nancy, she was once again forced to hold everything together. Friends close to the Oars said Nancy never left Tom's side during those months. She carried his grief alongside her own, helping him through sleepless nights and quiet breakdowns. The woman who had hauled firewood in sub-zero temperatures now carried something much heavier: the burden of emotional survival. And yet, she never asked for sympathy, never cried on camera, never posted cryptic messages or interviews begging for attention. She simply endured. The world had seen Nancy as the quiet one, the helper, the mountain wife. But in those days of mourning, she was the core holding everything up. Her strength wasn't just physical, it was soul deep. But just when it seemed the storm had passed, more rumors started to swirl. People began asking, where was Nancy Oar? Why had she gone so silent? And what surfaced next reopened the mystery all over again. Online rumors, panic, and a vanishing act no one expected. fans of Mountain Men began to notice something strange. No updates, no photos, no interviews. Nancy Oar, once a familiar face and quiet star of the series, had seemingly vanished. Her absence sparked whispers, then online chatter, and finally a full-blown rumor mill. Had she passed away? Was she seriously ill? Or was something darker being hidden? At first, it seemed harmless, just fans concerned for someone they admired. But then, the silence grew deafening. No word from Nancy. No official statement from History Channel. Not even a brief note from Tom. The most dedicated fans began digging. Some scoured public records. Others searched satellite images of the Yak Valley for signs of life. People speculated about a secret illness, a family rift, or even an off-grid tragedy. But here's where it gets even stranger. Old message boards lit up with one bizarre claim: that Nancy had been involved in a remote vehicle crash in a wilderness zone. Supposed emergency calls. A chopper that never came. A timeline that didn't make sense. The story spread like wildfire but was never confirmed. No news outlets covered it. No one in the family addressed it. And that silence? It only added fuel to the fire. What really happened? Was the crash real? Was it just misidentified information? Or had the Oars, masters of quiet survival, orchestrated their own disappearance to protect their peace? Some fans believe Nancy chose to disappear, stepping away from the spotlight to live in total privacy. Others aren't so sure. And here's the kicker. The more people searched, the less they found. Nancy Oar's online footprint shrank. No new photos. No recent records. Her once celebrated art exhibitions? Discontinued. Her name? Missing from recent Montana directories. It's like she erased herself completely. But the truth may be even more complicated than anyone realized. Because Nancy Oar wasn't just a TV star or a mountain wife. She was a woman carrying more than the world ever saw. And her silence may be her final act of strength. But don't scroll yet, because her legacy didn't vanish. It just changed form. The hidden life of Nancy Oar: art, philanthropy, and quiet power. Long before Mountain Men, Nancy Oar was building something beautiful. Far from the cameras, far from the chaos. She wasn't just Tom's wife or a survivalist in boots and leather. She was an artist, a philanthropist, and a woman who turned pain into purpose. And while fans wondered if she had disappeared forever, Nancy was still leaving a mark, just not in the way people expected. Born in Springfield, Illinois, Nancy showed early promise as a painter. Her love for creativity wasn't a hobby, it was a calling. She studied fine arts at the University of Illinois, holding her first solo exhibit by 2002. From the Art Institute of Chicago to the Miami International Art Fair, she created a name for herself in the world of modern abstraction and emotional storytelling. But here's where it gets inspiring. Her art wasn't just pretty pictures. It was about survival, identity, resilience. It reflected her life in the wild, her heartbreaks, her strength. And after she left television, she didn't retreat into silence. She redirected her energy. Nancy began donating pieces to charity events. She worked quietly with organizations focused on mental health, education, and underprivileged youth. No press releases, no headlines, just quiet, consistent giving. And yet, fans barely knew. That's Nancy's way. While others chased attention, she chose meaning. She could have capitalized on her fame, launched a brand, cashed in, but she didn't. Instead, she continued giving, creating, and loving off-camera, off-grid on her terms. Even now, sources close to the family say Nancy still paints, still donates, still builds community, even if it's behind the scenes. Her life didn't stop, it transformed. And that's the final twist. While people were asking if she'd disappeared, Nancy Oar was still right here. Just no longer performing, no longer proving anything. Just living her truth quietly, powerfully, and completely free. But if you think that's beautiful, wait until you hear how this story ends. Still standing and still together. For a couple who once lived off the grid, it's fitting that their final chapter is playing out far from the public eye. But make no mistake, Tom and Nancy Oar are still here, still breathing, still loving, and still showing the world what it means to endure. Despite rumors of death, illness, and tragedy, the truth is far more powerful. Tom and Nancy didn't vanish. They simply stepped back. Tom, now well into his 80s, is no longer chasing wolves or hauling logs through waist-deep snow. But he's still working with his hands, crafting leather, carving, staying busy. Nancy, always by his side, remains the quiet force who makes it all possible. She cooks, she cares, she creates, and she still believes in the life they built, even if it looks different now. But that's not the whole story. They faced loss, the tragic death of Tom's daughter, Tom's near-fatal heart scare, the painful goodbye to their mountain life. And yet, through it all, they've stayed true to themselves, choosing family over fame, simplicity over spectacle, and love over everything. They appear at small events from time to time. They do interviews when they feel like it. They share bits of their life, but never more than they're willing to. And maybe that's what made their story resonate in the first place. They never wanted to be stars. They just wanted to live on their own terms. Nancy Oar isn't gone. She's just evolved. She's the quiet hero behind the legacy, the artist behind the brush, and the woman who showed that strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's in the way you stay, the way you love, the way you hold someone's hand through the hardest winters of life. So if you thought this story was tragic, just wait. Because the video on your screen right now tells the most bizarre stories we've ever uncovered. Click it. Trust me, you won't believe how it ends.